Hello! This is the story of the Payment Protection Program and how it was cobbled together and exploited during and after the pandemic, and how the US government gave hundreds of billions of dollars directly to fraudsters. But it wasn't all a big mistake. Plenty of friends of the policymakers got their slice too. Of course.
Last 2 days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I saw a bit shining city upon you.
Era of greed and irresponsibility on Wall Street and in Washington has led us to a perilous moment.
In March of 2020, the COVID-19 started to really hit the US economy. That month alone, companies laid off a record 11.5 million workers, more than 4 million of which were in the hospitality sector. It became clear that these businesses would not be able to reopen in the immediate future, and if they were left to go broke, a good chunk of jobs and a good size of the seeable economy would be lost permanently. So Congress created the biggest small business-centered bailout program in modern US history. In 1 week, a bipartisan group of senators hammered out the details of the $349 billion Paycheck Protection Program, which later doubled in size and was the central program in the initial $2.2 trillion Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act. On March the 27th, then President Donald Trump signed the act. By the middle of April, the program was out of money, and Congress authorized more. People who had lost their jobs because of COVID needed immediate relief, so the application process for things like expanded unemployment weren't the 6 to 8 weeks of see attached sort of affair. It was pretty open to both professional fraudsters and identity thieves, and also people just willing to lie on the paperwork. $267 million was sent to people in federal prison when they filed for unemployment insurance, with one check even being sent to someone claiming their identity as one Poopy Pants. $139 million was sent to dead people. Various individuals raked in millions, claiming to be dozens or even hundreds of people. The IRS sent $8 billion to ineligible individuals. It was a free-for-all. As of June 2023, the US government has spent $4.2 trillion in COVID relief, and cops to fraud being in the tens of billions. But the Associated Press reckons that fraudsters potentially stole more than $280 billion in COVID-19 relief funding, with another $123 billion being wasted or misspent, amounting to 10% of funding. Enough money to triple the number of aircraft carriers in the United States Navy, or double the money the federal government spends on homelessness for 48 years. His opinion seems to be a bit of an outlier, but cybersecurity expert Haywood Talcove guesstimates the actual total might be more like $1 trillion. Anyway, the Paycheck Protection Program accounts for just under $1 trillion of that $4.2 trillion total. PPP was central to the CARES Act. If you think of the extended unemployment options as offering help to people who had lost their jobs because of COVID, PPP was meant to stop them from reaching that point. Congress's clearly stated goal was that PPP was being implemented to keep workers paid and employed across America. Ostensibly, it was for small businesses under 500 people, with certain waivers. Nancy Pelosi said she was very proud of the program, and Mitch McConnell called it a job-saving program. There was a good amount of backslapping, and even a couple of "We've saved Americas," although it didn't take long for the cracks to show. With PPP, there are many instances of downright fraud from international criminals. Applicants were allowed to self-certify after all, stolen identities raking in benefits, fake companies claiming loans when they never employed anyone or traded ever. But the real racket wasn't breaking the law at all, just finding the loophole or the crack to slip through. The loans were meant to be forgivable if your business spent 70% and then later 60% of the loan on its payroll. But one way of looking at this is, well, even if you don't meet that criteria, it's cheap money now with a mere 1% interest, well below inflation, if you do have to pay it back later. And if you don't, it's free money now that you keep forever. What happened was a substantial number of businesses which did take PPP loans did not use it to keep their staff. In fact, they got rid of their staff anyway. A 2022 study from the University of Texas at Austin found as much as $117 billion in questionable and possibly fraudulent loans, citing indicators such as non-registered businesses and multiple loans to the same address. The Small Business Administration, the SBA, who administrated PPP, have flagged nearly 2.3 million Paycheck Protection Program loans worth at least $189 billion. There are many examples, large and small. For example, in April of 2020, Manhattan-based PBM LLC, a commercial cleaners, told New York state authorities that it planned to lay off 349 workers the day after it received a $10 million loan to keep them on. By mid-2021, 40 companies across Pennsylvania alone had laid off at least 4,200 workers, despite collectively receiving nearly $70 million in PPP loans. Those employees included restaurant servers, manufacturing workers, and hotel staff. The same happened in big hotels across the United States. One hotel conglomerate that operates various Hyatts, Marriotts, and others, called Columbia Sussex, was even highlighted by 8 congresspeople in a letter to the SBA. Columbia Sussex is privately owned by the Young family. Before the pandemic, it had a revenue of $850 million and employed 6,500 people. It is not a small business. But somehow, yes, they qualified for PPP loans. Lots of them, because they used their corporate structure, a conglomerate of smaller entities, to get around the rules and apply for loans they didn't need. Again, all legal, and their loans were forgiven. They received up to $63 million through 17 similarly named but separate businesses, all registered to the same address, and they fired their staff anyway. The letter from the congresspeople suggests some of Columbia Sussex's hotels cut back to 10% of their pre-pandemic staff. So, where did that money go? Wherever Columbia Sussex wanted it, but certainly not to retaining workers. Similar things happened in other industries too. Gate Gourmet is a subsidiary of Swiss conglomerate Gate Group, which before the pandemic had revenues of almost $6 billion. Unlike Columbia Sussex, it didn't take loans and then fire people. It was a bit more clever. Instead, Gate Gourmet laid off thousands of workers across the United States, then applied for PPP to the tune of $171 million. It simply did this by not signing PPP contracts with the SBA when PPP was first available in March of 2020, but instead waiting until June. And it did this because it never needed the money, It just wanted the money. And the response from the Treasury? Basically, there's nothing we can do. It's not the spirit of the legislation, but the legislation was written in haste by ancient millionaires with no experience of actual leadership. I'm paraphrasing. Gate Gourmet actually did this on the advice of a Washington, D.C. lobbying firm, full of ex-staffers and revolving door shills. They were subsidized with taxpayers' money and guided by America's best and brightest, or at least by those with access, to take full advantage in a move that was legal and morally bankrupt. Living the dream. In 2020, political donors whose businesses got PPP loans put $52 million into the election. The vast majority of PPP loans were partially or entirely forgiven. An NPR analysis in January of 2023 put the number of loans being forgiven either entirely or just a little bit at 92%. There are at least 13 Republican politicians and 5 Democrats who received loans or whose relatives directly benefited from loans. Car dealerships owned by Representative Vern Buchanan received 3 PPP loans between $2.7 and $7 million. Later, he had at least $2.3 million of that forgiven. Representative Devin Nunes is, or at least was, a limited partner in 2 wineries that received separate PPP loans. Alpha Omega Winery received a loan for almost $1.4 million, all forgiven. Phase 2 Cellars received a loan just shy of $1 million, all forgiven.
By the way, I'm a member of Congress and you're not.
The business, owned by Marjorie Taylor Greene and her then-husband, Taylor Commercial Inc., accepted a PPP loan in the amount of $182,300 from the federal government. That business employed 12 people at the time, and the description of what it actually does is hilariously vague. General contractors specializing in construction. But that's not as funny as the business purpose listed on the Georgia government's website. Based. Paul Pelosi had, and maybe still has, a stake in EDI Associates worth between $250,000 and $500,000. He was a minority investor. Nevertheless, EDI Associates received a $1 million loan. All of the loan was forgiven. McConnell and his wife Chow denied knowledge of the PPP loan going to Chow's father's business that he founded, the father-in-law to one of the most powerful men in the country. The secretary has no connection to the business, and she had no idea a loan was obtained. Nevertheless, the full loan, almost $500,000, was forgiven. These last 2 examples show how not only people close to politicians benefited, but how people close to the politicians who pushed the PPP legislation through benefited. Now, I actually don't think it was a grift by Pelosi or McConnell. I think that the amount of money we're talking about here is really chump change for them, but it kind of shows you who they are, as if you need any more of that information. So entwined with the business world, they have no idea what they've invested in or what those businesses are doing. You'd think that it might be a good idea for senior politicians and their immediate families to divest. But, what, you expect Nancy and Mitch to live on the pittance that Congress gives them? Peasant. Pelosi has a net worth of $120 million. In 2020, she was the 6th richest person in Congress, with a salary of $223,500 and a side hustle speaking at events that brought her in another $1 million. Her net worth, combined with that of her husband, increased by an estimated $38.9 million in 2021 alone. That same year, McConnell was earning $193,400 as leader of the House Republicans, but was estimated to be worth in excess of $30 million, over $80 million when you combine his net worth with that of his wife's. That's from books, assets and investments, and playing the stock market, of which he certainly has no sensitive information of or access to. How very dare you. It's not so much that the businesses they were involved in shouldn't have gotten PPP, they were certainly legally entitled to do so, but it's nothing less than shameful to think that these people were spending the taxpayers' money willy-nilly while they're sitting at the absolute top, not in the 1%, but rather the 0.01%, the very cream. It's not that the idea of PPP was a bad one. Trying to save jobs during a public health crisis, that sounds like what government should be for. But the implementation was incredibly poor, and of course, I've saved the most devastating statistics for last. The American Economic Association analysed the effect of PPP in 2022. It found that the program cumulatively preserved between 2 and 3 million job years of employment over 14 months, at a cost of between $169,000 to $258,000 per job year retained, which, according to them, implies that only 23 to 34% of PPP dollars went directly to workers who would otherwise have lost jobs. The majority of money was used by businesses not to save workers, but just as quick, free cash to do with whatever they liked, and the vast majority of those loans were completely forgiven. So, PPP did help some of the people it was meant to. It did save some jobs. But really, it helped company owners and shareholders far more. It really makes the Democrats and Republicans both look like incompetent buffoons at best. Maybe at worst, more likely, crooks, running the country at the behest of their friends in the C-suite. But what are you going to do? Vote for a third-party candidate? Go ahead. Throw away your vote. Laughs maniacally. Well, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. You can support me on Patreon. You can send me pictures of your cat on Twitter, if you must. Cheers. Bye-bye.